may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I can remember hearing this when I was at primary school and thinking how true it was. However, as I've grown older and hopefully wiser, I've come to realize how false this statement actually is. Because sticks and stones may indeed break my bones and hurt me in the short term, but those bones will heal. Bruises will eventually fade. But the hurt that can be caused by words sometimes never leaves us, sometimes never heal. And this is in essence what James is trying to tell us this morning. Our tongues are powerful. They have the capacity to accomplish almost anything, or they can devastate, humiliate, and damage relationships permanently. And so as ever, James begins, or rather remains practical in his teaching. And so although he begins by addressing leaders of the church, because the nature of their position means that often they stand at the front and they talk to a large body of people, which means that their words have the ability to convey truth, or obscure it, or even deny it. And so they must be especially careful. As he reveals in verse 2 to us, it's relevant to us all. Remember in verse 2 he says, "We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check." James is not describing someone who is never at fault, but someone who generally doesn't stumble in what they say. It doesn't mean that they're sinless. Far from it. Rather, it means they've kind of developed a level of maturity in their faith, which allows them to keep a tight rein on their tongue. It's something he marks as he highlighted as a mark of authenticity earlier on in his book in chapter 1, verse 26. That being able to look after your tongue and speak carefully is a sign of a strong Christian faith. And in an effort to highlight for us the power of the tongue, James offers us up these images of a horse and a ship, being controlled by the bit and the rudder. Now, I'm not familiar with horses or particularly familiar with boats, but I know that these are small pieces of equipment in comparison to the size of the horse or the ship. And yet they can control the direction they turn in, keep them on the safe path or the safe sea, as much as one can. And James is saying the tongue does likewise. Despite its small size, it has the power to change the course of our lives. Chances are each of us this morning can think of a time when we've instantly regretted something we've said. Or can think of things we've said or not said that have changed the path of our lives for better or for worse. And it's why James speaks of the tongue having the same power as a fire. He knows that even the smallest spark can cause no end of damage. Now this reminded me of a story from when I was younger. Sort of in summer holidays from university, I came home. And it was one particularly hot and dry summer. And I came home and we had over 70 trees in our garden because the previous occupant was in the Forestry Commission. And so we had all these trees in the garden. And one of them was this big, fairly ugly conifer thing that was really tightly packed with needles. And swallowed all my tennis balls. I was well annoyed with it. But this conifer tree, this summer I came home, we discovered there was a wasp's nest in it. We had no clue where it was. It was too thick to see where it was. We just knew the wasps were in and out and in and out and in and out. That was their nest site. And so for the most part we ignored it. Until one sunny day, Dad decided we'd get the barbecue out and we'd have a nice barbecue. And at the same time he thought, I know, I've got this great idea. We could kill two birds with one stone. I'll get rid of the wasp's nest and I'll smoke them out. But as I've already mentioned, it was a dry, hot summer. And this was a particularly thick, bushy tree. And when Dad took out the smallest ember, that I didn't actually see it, and threw it into a small gap in between the needles, smoke was not the only outcome. Instead, there was an actual whoosh as the tree became a fireball. That small spark caused a major fire. It started melting the PVC eaves on the house. It charred the shed, put holes in my mum's new washing. My leg hair singed as I was handed the smallest imaginable hosepipe to try and put it out, and I was standing a good 5 meters away. And do you know what happened after all that? After the fire brigade turned up, which thankfully for our neighbours they called them because Mum and Dad didn't have the foresight to do that. The fire brigade arrived, put out this fire with this massive hosepipe in comparison to what I was holding, and the wasp nest was still there. We discovered afterwards it was underground, in the root system. Hopefully that illustration gives you a thinking kind of how our words have the power to do outrageous damage. The power of the hasty word, the untruthful statement, the sly suggestion, that harmful gossip or innuendo or impurity that we're joking about on the street corner. In much the same way, James is trying to tell us that the words we speak can deeply wound us, can deeply wound others. And I came across this picture, which hopefully Stuart's going to put up for us, which reminds us of the need of being careful with our words, but also the attitude with which we're speaking. It says at the bottom, never trust your tongue when your heart is bitter. When we're in a mood, or when we're tired, or when we're just frustrated, we take it out on others, even if we don't mean to, especially on our families. And so we see the power that our words can have on those we love when we're not careful with what we say. And as I was doing some research around the tongue, I came across this generalized statement that science has brought us to, that for every single negative statement we are told, we need 7 positive statements to get us back to the point we were at before we were told that negative statement. 7 positive, encouraging statements just to get us back to before the state we were in before we heard that one negative thought. Words are powerful. But today I think we might all recognize that we also need to consider the words we type. Because I imagine for a lot of us, we type with our fingers and we speak with our fingers far more than we do with our mouths these days. So we need to be vigilant in what we're speaking on our keyboards, on our phones. What is it that you share on Facebook? What are you tweeting about? Have you considered how your emails really read? Or those WhatsApp messages come across when there's no face for you to look at as you're hearing it? This week I've noticed on numerous occasions stories which have spoken of abuse or mistreatment that people have received online. Because online appears to have this anonymity that has led to some individuals choosing to use it as an opportunity to speak out things they would never dare dream speak face to face. And Duncan mentioned the death of Caroline Flack last week. And since then there's been this overwhelming demand for it to become a turning point for the treatment of celebrities on social media and the press. One such statement read like this: if we want the world to change, for less people to die in pain and shame, then we should pause before we next vent a pleasurable stab of vindictive judgment or jeering condemnation. If this is what our society is calling for, how much more should we as Christians be seeking to cultivate a loving and caring tongue or fingers? Are we prepared to be like the Christian James speaks of in verse 9, who's willing to worship and praise God at one moment and then the next turn around and belittle and berate those around them just because they don't meet your expectations? Imagine for a moment that you were at the football on Saturday And you leave feeling so disgruntled that you leave an abusive message on a particular player's whatever account, social media account. Now imagine that it's Sunday and you walk into church, and who should you see but that same player you've just berated? What sort of impression do you think they're going to have of you when they see you? When they recognize your face from that little profile picture? Oh, you're the one who said that about me. What's he going to say to them about our church as a community if we're writing such stuff on social media or speaking it? And perhaps most importantly, what will it tell them about God? Do you think they would leave that Sunday morning feeling that they'd met and worshipped with a wonderful and loving God who cares for us and has compassion for us no matter their circumstances? As Christians, we are ambassadors for Christ. We represent Him here on earth. And so we need to be asking ourselves, what does my tongue reveal to me about my heart? And I ask that because in Matthew 15, Jesus said, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander." What comes out of our mouths or away from our fingers are our thoughts. And these thoughts tend to reveal what lies at the core of our very belief system. Especially when we're angry or tired or frustrated. Especially with our families, who know which buttons to press to wind us up. One commentator put it like this: the tongue is something of a barometer, a spiritual barometer. It shows us what is really going on inside us. All of this is a warning to us to be careful with what we say, of how we say it, of what we type, and the way we're typing it and communicating it to people. The book of Proverbs is full of examples for us of how, or the need for us to weigh up what we're saying, because the tongue is so powerful. This isn't something new. It's been recognized for years and years, for centuries. Take, for example, Proverbs 15:28. It says, "The heart of the righteous weighs its answer, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil." Or Proverbs 12:18, which says, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And perhaps the one I like the most, Proverbs 16:24, which says, "Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones." Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. But as Christians, we're not called to silence our tongues. Rather, we are called to use them for the glory of God. And the good news for us is that we're not expected to do this on our own. Do you remember in Acts 2 how the Spirit was poured out upon the disciples at Pentecost and helped them to speak so powerfully to so many different people in the crowd in their own language? We have that same Spirit inside us. Jesus sent the Spirit to help us, to guide us in all areas of our lives, including our speech. So our conversation is to be filled with the grace of God and seasoned with the salt of the gospel. And hopefully this image will help you just use it, kind of these three questions in this next image we can use as a testing point for what we say. Just before you speak, let these words pass through these three gates. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And if it is, then I think it's worthwhile sharing it. But if it's not, do we really need to say it? I want to leave you with a story this morning which will lead us to our luggage labels. And it really illustrated the power of speech and gracious words. I came across a story. It's about a teacher who decided to help her students develop a more positive outlook on themselves. And so initially she called it the Compliments Project. But the students renamed it Spread the Love. And it's this really simple idea, but hugely powerful. Each student was invited to come to the front of the class, to sit with their back to the whiteboard, and the other students would come and write words about them, or phrases about them. Positive statements about who they were. And when they'd finished, and the board was full of statements and words, the student would stand up and turn round and read what had been written about them. And so the teacher said that she gave no directions, except that what was written on the board had to be positive and school appropriate. She'd put on some music, and away they went. And at one point, a student walked up to the board and wrote, "I forgive you for everything you have ever done to me." And as those words went up, there were tears around the entire room. And it was in that moment that the teacher knew she had something special. She'd found something that made a difference. And as she left that class, she was beaming, in her own words, like $1,000,000. She went away, and students were walking out of the class with smiles, telling their friends about what they'd done at their lockers. And so she went to her next class and tried it again to check it wasn't a fluke. Doing that Spread the Love activity changed the outlook in the school as students looked at themselves differently and looked at each other differently. And so this morning I thought we would try the same. We would do our own spreading of the love. So you each should have that luggage label. You've written your name on it. And what I want you to do this morning is just pass it to the people on either side of you. And that person will write something positive about you. If you're kind of on your own or kind of on the end of a line, I suppose you could just pass it along over to the next side so you're getting at least 2 statements. Or you could pass it to the person behind you or in front of you. Whatever works, you're getting 2 or 3 comments just about yourself from different people. Because as I said earlier, for every negative statement we hear, we need 7 to rebuild us up. So hopefully you can carry these in your Bibles or keep them in your purse or your wallet. And when you get one of those negative statements coming your way, you can pull it out. And you've got 2 or 3 positive statements to get you on the road to being back where you were. So I'll give you about 5 minutes this morning to do that as part of our worship and our care for one another. This morning you'll be able to take these away with you and be encouraged. You'll feel positive and be able to hold on to them for the future. Now as we do that, we're going to join together and stay seated as we sing our offertory hymn just now.